So first of all, thanks everyone for 100 subscribers. That is a huge milestone that I never would have thought that this channel would reach. So thank you. But today we're going to be ranking every charm from the game Hollow Knight. Keep in mind this is just my opinions, but let's just get right into it. So starting off at the bottom of F tier, we have King Soul. This charm is important to the game's story, but at 5 notches, let's be honest, you would never use this charm if you didn't have to. Next up is Heavy Blow. There's just no situation that I can think of where this charm would be good to have ever. So yeah, F tier. Next up is Dash Master. This charm is a good premise. It lowers the cooldown of your dashes or something. But it has one feature that ruins the whole charm for me, which is the down dash, which is really bad for platforming sections where you have to do a lot of pogoing and dashing, because it is way too easy to misinput a down dash straight into spikes or acid or whatever. So F tier charm. Next up is Glowing Womb. This charm uses your soul to spawn hatchlings, which have a really low damage output and also are just bad. Next up is Unbreakable Greed. This charm being unbreakable means that you have to spend a ton of money to get it, which means it's going to be one of the last things you most likely buy in the game. The whole purpose of this charm is that you get more Geo while having it equipped. So there's really no point to this charm at all if it's one of the last things you buy in the game. But that finishes off the F tier. So now it's time to start the biggest tier, D tier, with what will probably be the most controversial charm on this tier list, and that is Steady Body. Steady Body is a charm that a lot of people really like and a lot of people really dislike, and I really dislike it. It basically just makes it so that you stand still when hitting stuff with your nail, instead of the usual getting knocked back a little bit. And that's just, why would you need it? It's just a useless charm. I understand that some people think it's really good, but for me personally, there's so many better uses for that one notch. Just hold forwards. Next up is Sprint Master. This charm makes you walk a bit faster. And if you're like me, or most players I would assume, you probably just dash everywhere anyways, so I don't really know why you would need this. Next up is Wayward Compass. This charm shows you where you are on the map, so not completely useless. This is good for your first playthrough, and maybe if you have a bad sense of direction, I guess, but for me, this charm is not very good, especially once you get to know the map well. Next up is Deep Focus. This charm makes you heal 2 masks, but at a much slower rate than normal, and also costs 4 notches. So that's just way too expensive for me. Maybe if the added time was lower, so you could heal the 2 masks in a shorter amount of time. But for me, 4 notches, just not worth it. Next up is Balder Shell. This charm isn't super useful. It makes it so that you can heal a few times without getting hit, and then the shell breaks until you sit on a bench. This is used for any Radiance runs and stuff, but I've never seen anyone use it during a normal playthrough of the game, and it's not that good. D tier. Next up is Shape of Un. You turn into a slug, so D tier. Next up is Spore Shroom. This charm isn't horrible, but there's just better uses of your notches in my opinion. It does have an added feature that not many people know about, I guess, that allows you to read the lore tablets and fungal wastes. So that's kind of nice if you want lore. Next up is Grubberfly's Elegy. This charm lets you shoot lasers out of your nail when you're at full health. It's useful for like Markoth and Godhome, and other than that, I don't really know when you would use it. It'd be better if you didn't have to have full health, but I guess that's like a Legend of Zelda reference probably. I don't know. Anyways, D tier charm. Next up is Joni's Blessing. This just makes all of your masks lifeblood, and then you get like 2 more of them. You've probably never used this other than to get lifeblood core, which is in a room where you like need a lot of lifeblood masks to get it. Anyways, this charm is not good or useful at all really. Probably could have been lower on the list even than this. Next up is Soul Eater. This charm is good, but way too expensive. It's another 4-notch charm. So D tier, just too expensive. Next up is Hive Blood. You've probably only used this charm for White Palace. It's really not useful for anything else. It does have an added feature that almost no one knows about, I think, which is that the enemies in the hive become passive. But since the only purpose of the hive really is to get this charm, you're probably not going to go back there after getting it. So that feature isn't that useful if you ask me. This charm is also expensive. It's like 4 notches, I think. Another D tier. Next up is Dream Shield. This charm is not great. It's not useless either. Just kind of a mid charm in my opinion. It also makes annoying sounds, I guess. Next up is Thorns of Agony. This charm is kind of good if you're in the early game and you don't have many other charms to choose from, but other than that, there's better options. Next up is Weaver Song. This is slightly better than Glowing Womb. It makes companions that don't need soul to spawn, so it's basically Glowing Womb, but it doesn't eat all of your soul. Still not a great charm. Next up is Fragile Heart. This charm gives you more masks, but it can also break. And the reason I don't like this charm and put it so low is because if you need more masks, it's probably because you're doing like a hard boss fight or something. And if you die, it just breaks. So unless you're first trying the hard boss fight, this charm isn't great. And I can't think of other situations where you would use this charm. So overall, finishing off D tier with that one. And starting off C tier, we have Defender's Crest. This charm isn't super useful, but I've heard that it apparently helps with the Lost Kin fight. I've never tried it myself, but I guess that's a thing. And it just gives you unique interactions with NPCs. That's like an added feature. Most of you probably knew about that. Overall, this charm isn't really that useful, but it has some cool NPC interactions, which is the main reason I put it this high. But next up is Fragile Greed. This is the fragile version of Unbreakable Greed, which I talked about earlier, and it's actually not a terrible charm because you can get it pretty early on in the game, and the added geo might be kind of useful. I've never had a need to use this charm myself, but it's there. It's not horrible, but it's not great either in my opinion, so C tier. Next up is Stalwart Shell. Not quite sure how to pronounce that, honestly. This is a charm that I've never used personally. It just gives you more iframes after taking a hit, so I've just never used this, but it sounds like mildly useful, so C tier. Next up is Soul Catcher. You would assume it's a worse version of Soul Eater, but it's actually better in my opinion because it only costs 2 notches. You just get less added soul than with Soul Eater. This charm is like a really early game charm, so you'll probably have it equipped for a while until you get more than 1 or 2 charms in your inventory. Though C tier, it's not horrible, but it's not a great charm either. Next up is Lifeblood Heart, or this just gives you 2 Lifeblood masks. That's like a mildly useful charm, not much else to say. Next up is Fluke Nest. This charm just replaces your Fireball spell with flukes. It's not really a good charm, but it's like really broken. There's lots of like ways you can cheese bosses with this charm, so that's why I've given it C tier. It could be higher, but the only reason it's actually good is because of bugs in the game. So I'm gonna give it just a mid C tier ranking. And that finishes off C tier. So starting off B tier, we have Grimchild. Grimchild isn't that useful. It's a companion charm, just like Weaver Song or Glowing Womb. And it's really not a great charm, but it's a nice companion to have. Like having Grimchild follow you around is just cute. So I like this one because it's cute. And it's also just a cool charm to obtain. Like fighting NKG is fun. So this is a fun one to get. Probably the hardest charm to get in my opinion, but it's fun. So kind of a weird ranking here, but I'm giving Grimchild B tier. Next up is Lifeblood Core. For just 1 notch more than Lifeblood Heart, you can get Boar Lifeblood Mask. This is actually kind of a useful charm, although there are better alternatives. Next up is a charm you probably didn't expect to be this high, but it's Gathering Swarm. So this charm is one you can get really early on in the game, and it is actually a really useful charm to have early game. When your inventory is pretty empty, you can just throw this on, and it makes getting Geo a lot easier in the early game when you really need it. So this charm is quite good. Next up is Fury of the Fallen, finishing off B tier with this one. This charm just makes you stronger when you're at 1 mask, which is like a good thing. That is pretty good. But if you're bad at the game, like me, once you get to 1 mask, you probably just panic and die anyways. But if you were good at the game, I can see this being ranked even higher than B tier. It's also used in like boss speedruns a lot, so that's something to note. Starting off A tier now, we have Sharp Shadow. This charm is really good for bosses like Trader Lord, where you use Shade Dash a lot. It just makes your Shade Dash deal damage. And this charm is good, but I don't like it for platforming because it also increases the length of your Shade Dash. And if you've gone the whole game adjusted to the normal dash distance, increasing it slightly really messes with your platforming, more than you would think. And that's why this charm isn't ranked higher than A tier. Overall, good charm though. Next up is Nailmaster's Glory. You can just charge your nail arts faster. That's a good charm, worth the 1 notch. Next up is Grub Song. This charm just allows you to gather soul from getting hit. So it's not a bad charm. It's only 1 notch, I think. So it's a good option to have, especially earlier on in the game when you don't have many other charms. It's useful if you're getting hit a lot. Or you could just be good at the game, I guess. But anyways, A tier charm. Next up is Carefree Melody. Since I did NKG instead of the banishment ending, I've never actually used this charm, but my friend has told me that it's like really good, so I'm putting it in A tier. Never used it myself though. Next up is Long Nail. This charm is only a couple of notches and it extends the length of your nail, which is quite useful. So this is a good charm to finish off A tier with. Starting S tier, we have Fragile Strength. This charm just makes you stronger. Straightforward, really good charm. S tier. Next up is Spell Twister. This charm just lets you cast spells for less soul. It's a very good charm to have, especially for spell builds. This charm is great. Next up, we have Quick Focus. This charm is pretty cheap for what it does, in my opinion. You can just focus faster. This charm is vital for bosses like NKG, where the staggers or healing windows are all really small. Quick Focus is so useful. Next up is Dream Wielder. This is the last 1-notch charm that I'm going to be going over on the list, and it's the best one by far. You can just use your Dream Nail faster, and it also increases like the essence drop rate. You get more soul from using your Dream Nail as well. Overall, very good charm to have. And finishing off S tier, we have Mark of Pride. It's a 3-notch charm, and it's basically just better long nail. You get more nail reach. This is a really good charm. And that finishes off S tier. So finally, we have the S plus tier. And I'm starting off with something that you may find a bit weird, but the first charm I'm going to be putting in S plus tier is Void Heart. So this charm doesn't have like a super useful feature or anything with it. It just makes it so that your Shade and also siblings and other void enemies don't attack you. So having your Shade not attack you, it's useful. It's not like great, but my reasoning for putting this charm so high up is that it costs 0 notches, and a completely free charm can't possibly be bad. Next up is Unbreakable Heart. This is the unbreakable version of Fragile Heart, obviously. You just get more masks, but it doesn't break. This charm is great. I use it for my Pantheon runs and stuff. It is just very useful for only 2 notches. Next up is Shaman Stone. This is top 3 charms. It just makes your spells bigger and stronger. This charm is just great to have on all the time. Next up, we have Quick Slash. This charm is easily one of the best in the entire game. It makes it so that your cooldown between nail hits is much lower, and this charm for combat is just great. For bosses, for normal gameplay, for anything. If you don't have this charm on, what are you doing? And finally, the best charm in the entire game, at the top of S plus tier, we have Unbreakable Strength. This charm just makes you stronger, just like Fragile Strength, but it doesn't break. This charm is great. You should have it on all the time. The extreme cost is definitely worth it. And that concludes my Hollow Knight charms tier list. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. I'm probably going to make more videos like this in the future. Maybe not about Hollow Knight, maybe not about games at all, but just more tier list stuff will be coming soon. And thanks again for 100 subscribers.